I'm Rebecca, 32 female. For most of my life, I've lived in a city that felt more like a stage for my family's drama than my own home. As a senior UX/UI designer, I build logical, user-friendly worlds on screens, a stark contrast to the illogical, hostile environment I grew up in. My entire existence has been a quiet rebellion against the expectations set by my mother, a woman who measures love in stock prices and social standing. This is the story of how I finally logged out of her system, not with a bang, but with a plane ticket and a quiet smile. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up as the daughter of a leaner Vance was like living in a beautifully furnished museum. Everything was exquisite, impeccably maintained, and cold to the touch. Our family home, a sprawling mansion in the most affluent part of the city, wasn't a place for skinned knees or messy art projects. It was a testament to my mother's success as a retired real estate mogul, a showroom for her ambition. My father, Robert, a brilliant corporate lawyer before he retired, had long ago faded into the background, becoming a silent partner in my mother's grand production. He was a kind man, but his kindness was passive, a gentle breeze against the hurricane that was a leaner. He saw her dismissiveness, her casual cruelty, but chose peace over confrontation, leaving my brother and me to navigate the storm. My younger brother, Leo, learned to sail those turbulent waters with ease. At 29, he was everything my mother wanted in an heir: charming, ruthless, and completely devoted to the family's image and wealth. He was an investment manager, a title that sounded impressive but really meant he managed the vast fortune my mother had accumulated. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. His successes were magnified and celebrated, his failures quietly swept under expensive Persian rugs. He mirrored our mother's values perfectly, believing that net worth was the ultimate measure of a person's value. I, on the other hand, was a glitch in her perfect system. I chose a career in technology and design, something my mother dismissed as playing with computers. She wanted me to be a lawyer like my father or marry into another powerful family. Instead, I found passion in creating seamless digital experiences, in the logic and empathy required to understand how a person interacts with a product. It was a world she couldn't control or understand, so she devalued it. Every achievement of mine was met with a lukewarm, "That's nice, dear," before the conversation immediately shifted to Leo's latest stock market victory. My only real ally in the family was my Uncle Marcus, my mother's older brother. At 59, he was a history professor at the local university, a man who valued books over bonds and knowledge over notoriety. He was the family's black sheep, the one who'd opted out of the relentless pursuit of wealth. He saw the toxic dynamics for what they were. "She's built a kingdom, Rebecca," he told me once over coffee, his eyes full of a sad wisdom. "And in her kingdom, loyalty is currency, and she's the only one who can mint it. Don't ever let her convince you that her currency is the only one that matters." His words were a lifeline in the suffocating atmosphere of our family. He was the one who encouraged my interest in art and technology, who celebrated my acceptance into a top design school when my mother had merely shrugged. The Gilded Cage wasn't just about emotional manipulation, it was financial. From a young age, my mother made it clear that the family fortune came with strings. Compliance was rewarded. Independence was punished. Leo received a 7-figure startup fund for his investment portfolio on his 25th birthday. I received a lecture about the instability of a creative career and a gift certificate to a designer boutique she favored. The message was always clear: fall in line or you'll be left with nothing. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. I was proud of the life I was building on my own. I had a great job, my own apartment, which I paid for myself, a point of silent pride, and a growing reputation in my field. I didn't need her money. But the constant, subtle reminders that I was less than were like a slow-drip poison. Family dinners were the worst. They were formal affairs, held every Sunday, where my mother would hold court. She'd praise Leo for his financial acumen while simultaneously making a backhanded comment about my little website job. One evening, I mentioned I was leading a major redesign project for an international tech company. My father looked impressed, and even Leo offered a grudging nod. My mother, however, just waved her hand dismissively. "It's amazing what they pay people for these days," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Leo just closed a deal that will net the family more than you'll make in a decade, but I'm sure your little project is very colorful." The table went silent. I felt the familiar hot sting of shame. I looked at my father, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, anything. He just cleared his throat and took a sip of his wine, his gaze fixed on his plate. Leo smirked, enjoying the show. It was in that moment that the bars of the cage felt colder and harder than ever before. I realized it wasn't about the money. It was about respect. And in my mother's world, I would never earn it because I refused to play by her rules. The need for a way out, a real escape, began to solidify from a vague wish into a concrete goal. I didn't just want to be independent. I wanted to be free, truly and completely free from her suffocating orbit. The cage was beautiful, but it was still a cage, and I was slowly realizing I had the key. I just needed the courage to use it. The tipping point, the moment a quiet desire for freedom became a burning, undeniable necessity, came at my father's retirement party. It wasn't just a small family gathering. It was a grand affair orchestrated by my mother to celebrate my father's career, but more accurately, to showcase her own status as the wife of a successful man and the matriarch of a powerful family. She rented out the main ballroom of the city's most exclusive country club, a place where the air was thick with the scent of old money and new ambition. The guest list was a who's who of the city's legal and financial elite, judges, partners from top law firms, and the kind of wealthy investors my mother and Leo courted. It was a performance, and we all had our roles to play. Leo was the charming heir apparent, effortlessly networking and shaking hands. My father was the guest of honor, looking slightly overwhelmed but grateful. I was the dutiful daughter, expected to smile, look pretty, and be a silent testament to the family's good breeding. I had just come off a huge professional success. My team and I had launched the redesigned platform I'd been leading, and the results were phenomenal. User engagement was up by 200%, and the project was being lauded in tech journals. I was proud, and for a fleeting, foolish moment, I thought perhaps this time, my achievement would be big enough for my mother to acknowledge. I wore a simple but elegant dark blue dress, a stark contrast to my mother's glittering gold gown. As I mingled, a few of my father's old colleagues, people who had known me since I was a child, asked what I was up to. When I explained my role and the success of the project, they were genuinely impressed. One of them, a senior judge named Arthur, patted my arm warmly. "That's wonderful, Rebecca. Your father is so proud of you. We were just talking about your knack for technology." I felt a rare warmth spread through my chest. Maybe things were changing. Maybe she was finally seeing my world as valid. Later in the evening, my mother took the stage to give a speech. She spoke elegantly about my father's dedication and integrity, hitting all the right notes. Then, as she was winding down, she decided to speak about her children. "And of course," she began, her voice resonating through the microphone, "what is success without family to share it with? I am so incredibly proud of my son, Leo." She beamed at him, and he stood a little taller. "He has a brilliant mind for business, a true visionary who is already taking our family's legacy to new heights. We are so blessed." A round of polite applause followed. I waited, my heart beating a little faster, for her to mention me. She scanned the crowd, and her eyes landed on me. A strange, cold smile played on her lips. "And my daughter Rebecca is here as well." Her tone shifted, becoming lighter, laced with something that sounded like pity. "She's carved her own little path in the tech world." She said the word tech as if it were a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. The crowd chuckled softly. "While Leo is building empires, Rebecca is making sure the buttons on your phone are pretty. It's a different kind of ambition, I suppose." The room filled with laughter. It wasn't cruel laughter from most. It was the polite, follow-the-host's lead kind of laughter, but it felt like 1,000 tiny cuts. My face burned. I could feel every eye in the room on me. I saw Judge Arthur give me a sympathetic look. My Uncle Marcus, standing near the back, looked furious. My father was staring at his shoes again, but my mother wasn't finished. Someone from the audience, a friend of hers, called out playfully, "Well, Eleanor, you've got one to run the business and one to decorate the house." My mother laughed, a loud, theatrical sound that sealed my humiliation. "Exactly," she declared into the microphone. "Every family needs an artist, don't they? We're just so proud she's found something to keep her bus." Why, she then raised her glass to my father, and the moment was over for everyone but me. The crowd's attention shifted, but I remained frozen, the echo of their laughter ringing in my ears. She had taken my greatest professional achievement and reduced it to a child's craft project in front of hundreds of people who mattered in my parents' world. She hadn't just dismissed me, she had used me as a punchline to elevate my brother. I managed to escape to a secluded balcony overlooking the golf course. The cool night air did little to quell the fire in my cheeks. I leaned against the railing, taking deep breaths, fighting back tears of pure rage and mortification. A few minutes later, the door slid open and my Uncle Marcus stepped out. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, looking up at the stars. "I'm sorry, Becca," he finally said, his voice low and heavy. "That was inexcusable." "It's what she does," I replied, my voice hoarse. "But never like that, never so publicly." "Your father should have stopped her," he said, his jaw tight. "He should have walked up on that stage and taken the microphone." But we both knew he wouldn't. He never did. That night, driving home, the silence in my car was a universe. The city lights blurred through my tear-filled eyes. The gilded cage was no longer just a metaphor for emotional neglect. It was a stage for my public degradation. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was done being a part of the show. The applause for my brother, the laughter at my expense, my father's silent complicity, it all coalesced into a single, resolute thought: I'm getting out. Not just moving out, but getting out. Far away. Where her voice, her judgment, and her laughter couldn't reach me ever again. The weeks following the retirement party were a blur of quiet fury. The public humiliation had acted as a chemical agent, crystallizing my years of resentment into a hard, clear plan. I was no longer just hurt, I was motivated. My interactions with my family became a carefully managed performance. I was polite, but distant, a ghost at the Sunday dinners I could no longer avoid without raising suspicion. I was playing the long game now, and the first step was to understand the full scope of the system I was planning to escape. My mother's power was rooted in two things: her force of personality and her money. While I couldn't change who she was, I could certainly learn more about the latter. My Uncle Marcus had always hinted that my mother's financial control was absolute, but I had never bothered with the details, content in my own financial independence. Now, those details felt critical. My opportunity came unexpectedly. My parents were away on a 2-week cruise, a celebratory trip for my father's retirement. They had asked me to stop by the house once or twice to collect the mail and water my mother's prized orchids. It was a task she never would have entrusted to a housekeeper, and a small act of feigned trust she extended to me to maintain the illusion of a happy family. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, I let myself into the cold, silent mansion. The place felt even more like a museum without its curators. As I was sorting through a pile of mail on the antique desk in my father's study, I noticed one of the drawers was slightly ajar. This was unusual. My father was a meticulous man, everything had its place. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside the drawer, beneath a stack of old letterhead, was a thick, leather-bound folder. It was labeled simply "Estate Planning." My heart began to pound. This was it. I knew I shouldn't look, that it was a profound invasion of privacy, but the words my mother had spoken at the party echoed in my mind. "We're just so proud she's found something to keep her busy." That wasn't just an insult. It was a dismissal of my entire life, a declaration of my worthlessness in her eyes. My hands trembled as I lifted the folder and opened it on the desk. The first document was a copy of their joint will. I skimmed through the legal jargon, my eyes searching for the distribution clauses. My breath caught in my throat when I found them. The estate, upon the passing of both parents, was to be divided. The house, the art collection, the extensive stock portfolio, the vacation properties, everything. 90% of the total assets were to be placed in a trust managed by and for my brother, Leo. The remaining 10% was designated for me. 10%. It wasn't the amount that shocked me. I had long made peace with the idea that Leo was the chosen one. It was the cold, contractual finality of it. Seeing it in black and white, legally notarized, was a gut punch. I was officially, legally, worth 1/9 of my brother. But it was the next document that truly broke me. It was a more recent addendum, a letter of intent drafted by my mother and signed by my father. It outlined the reasoning for the lopsided distribution. My moth. Ours words, though filtered through a lawyer's pen, were unmistakable. It stated that Leo, having chosen a career path that directly contributes to the preservation and growth of the family's legacy, required the lion's share of the capital to continue his work. It then went on to describe me. It mentioned my artistic pursuits and my choice to follow a less conventional and financially significant career. It stated that my 10% share, while smaller, would be more than sufficient for a person of her means and lifestyle. The final sentence was the one that made me feel sick. It is our hope that this distribution will provide Rebecca with security without burdening her with the responsibilities of significant wealth management, for which she has shown no aptitude or interest. No aptitude or interest. She had painted me as a flighty, simple-minded artist, incapable of handling the very thing she worshipped, money. It was a lie, a carefully constructed narrative to justify her blatant favoritism. I had built a successful career, managed my own finances impeccably, and owned my own home. I had aptitude. I simply had no interest in her world, her games, and for that, I was being written off as incompetent. My father's signature at the bottom was a second betrayal. He had co-signed the lie. His passive acceptance had become active participation in my erasure. I carefully placed the documents back in the folder, slid the folder back under the letterhead, and closed the drawer, making sure it looked untouched. I walked out of the study and stood in the grand, empty foyer, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The air, once just cold, now felt suffocating. The will wasn't just about money. It was the story my mother had written for me, the final word on my life, a permanent inscription of my status as a disappointment. She intended for this narrative to outlive her, to be the last word. She believed she had already won, that my future was already decided and dismissed. I stood there, surrounded by the opulent trappings of my gilded cage, and felt a profound, chilling clarity. This wasn't just an escape anymore. It was a reclamation. I had to write my own ending, one she could never have imagined. The lie in that drawer had given me the one thing I was missing, not a reason, but a right. The right to leave it all behind without an ounce of guilt. The discovery in my father's study changed the game. My plan shifted from a simple escape to a strategic exit. If my mother's world revolved around money, control, and information, then I needed to arm myself with the same. I needed to understand the full extent of the financial empire I was leaving behind, not because I wanted a piece of it, but because knowledge was power. Knowing the truth would be my armor against any future attempts at manipulation or guilt-tripping. My first call was to my Uncle Marcus. We met at his favorite quiet pub on the university campus, a place filled with the smell of old books and draft beer, a world away from the sterile gloss of my mother's life. I laid it all out for him, the public humiliation at the party, the will, the letter of intent, my father's signature. Marcus listened patiently, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, he stared into his beer for a long moment before looking up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "I always knew she was controlling, Becca," he said, his voice low. "But to codify it like that, to write you off with such clinical cruelty, that's a new level, even for her." He took a deep breath. "Your father is a good man, but he's a weak one. He's spent 40 years enabling her because it's easier than fighting. He's complicit, and you have every right to be angry with him." "I am," I admitted. "But right now, anger isn't enough. I need to understand. I feel like I've only seen the tip of the iceberg." Marcus nodded, his professorial mind kicking into gear. Eliner's business dealings were always complex. She built her real estate empire by being shrewd and utterly ruthless. She hides assets in a web of shell corporations and trusts. The will you saw is probably just the public-facing part of it. The real money, the real control, is likely buried deeper. He suggested I look into a discreet financial investigator, someone who specialized in forensic accounting. Not to challenge the will, he clarified, seeing the hesitation on my face, but for your own peace of mind, to get a true map of the cage before you fly out of it. He gave me the name of a man named David Chen, a retired IRS agent who now worked as a private consultant. He was known for being brilliant, discreet, and expensive. I didn't care about the cost. I considered it an investment in my own liberation. My meeting with David Chen took place in a nondescript office in a part of town my mother wouldn't be caught dead in. He was a small, unassuming man in his late 60s with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I explained the situation carefully, omitting the emotional details and focusing on the facts. I told him I had reason to believe my family's declared assets were not the full picture and that I wanted a clear, confidential overview of my parents' financial standing and how it was structured. I didn't tell him why. He didn't ask. For him, it was a puzzle, a series of numbers to be reconciled. I gave him what little information I had. My parents' names, their known business entities, and the name of their longtime family lawyer. Over the next month, David worked silently and efficiently. He sent me encrypted emails with brief, periodic updates. Meanwhile, I lived a double life. By day, I was the perfect senior UX/UI designer, leading meetings and hitting deadlines. By night, I was secretly coordinating with David, while also researching visa requirements, job markets, and living costs in several countries. Portugal, New Zealand, and Spain were at the top of my list. At the obligatory Sunday dinners, I was a master of detached cordiality. I listened to my mother's monologues and Leo's boasts with a serene smile, my mind miles away, planning my future. They mistook my silence for submission, for the resignation of a defeated daughter. They had no idea it was the quiet calm of a general planning a campaign. The day David's final report came in, I locked myself in my apartment and read it from start to finish. It was 100 pages of flowcharts, asset lists, and legal analyses, and it was breathtaking. My uncle was right. The will was a smokescreen. My mother had established an intricate series of offshore trusts and holding companies. The vast majority of her wealth, a figure that was nearly triple what I had ever imagined, was shielded from taxes and, more importantly, from any legal claims. It was structured so that Leo was not just the heir, but the designated successor, with power of attorney over key accounts that would activate under specific circumstances. But the most damning discovery was something called the Legacy Trust. This was a separate, secret trust fund established years ago. According to the documents David had unearthed, it was funded by the sale of a significant commercial property my maternal grandfather had originally gifted to both my mother and my uncle Marcus. My mother had convinced Marcus to let her manage his share, promising him a greater return. Instead, she had rolled the entire proceeds into this trust. The terms of the trust were explicit. The funds were to be used for the education and career advancement of her descendants who chose paths in business or law. It was a financial mechanism designed specifically to benefit Leo and exclude me, built partly on funds that should have belonged to my uncle. She hadn't just written me out of the future. She'd written me out of the past, using my uncle's inheritance to do it. The report didn't make me angry. It made me cold. It was the final piece of evidence I needed. My mother's actions weren't born of thoughtless favoritism. They were the result of a deliberate, long-term, and meticulously executed strategy to disinherit me philosophically and financially. She hadn't just chosen a favorite. She had actively worked to dismantle my position within the family, using deceit and manipulation to do it. I closed the report, my resolve hardening into steel. My plan was no longer just about leaving. It was about making a statement. I didn't want her money. I wanted her to know that I saw everything, all the lies, all the schemes, and I wanted her to know that none of it mattered. Her power, her money, her entire carefully constructed world, it had no hold on me. Armed with the chilling clarity of David Chen's report, my mission became one of meticulous, silent execution. The goal was no longer just to leave, but to vanish from my family's sphere of influence so completely that by the time they realized I was gone, I would be an ocean away, living a life they couldn't touch. My professional life became my cover. The long hours I was putting in were real, but they were now twofold. During the day, I was managing my team, but my evenings and weekends were dedicated to building my new future. The first, most crucial step was securing a job. I polished my portfolio until it gleamed, highlighting the international project that my mother had so publicly mocked. That very project had given me visibility on a global scale. I began discreetly applying for senior-level UX/UI positions in Lisbon, Portugal. The city's burgeoning tech scene, beautiful culture, and favorable time zone for remote collaboration with US companies made it the perfect choice. I networked quietly through professional online communities, reaching out to contacts and recruiters. I took interviews during my lunch breaks, using a coffee shop with reliable Wi-Fi several blocks from my office. My mother and Leo's complete disinterest in my career was my greatest asset. They never asked for details, never cared about my projects, so they never suspected a thing. Within 6 weeks, I had 2 competitive offers. I accepted a position as a lead designer for a fast-growing fintech company in Lisbon. The salary was excellent, and they offered a comprehensive relocation package, which would handle the complexities of the visa process. With the signed contract saved in a secure cloud server, the escape plan moved from theoretical to tangible. The next phase was logistics. I began to methodically untangle my life from my home city. I hired a minimalist consultant under the guise of spring cleaning. Together, we went through my apartment, sorting everything I owned into 4 piles: keep, sell, donate, and discard. The keep pile was ruthlessly small: a few sentimental items, essential documents, and my professional equipment. Everything else was sold online or given away. My beautiful apartment, once a symbol of my hard-won independence, was slowly stripped down to its bare bones. Every item sold was another tie cut, another anchor lifted. I opened a Portuguese bank account online and started wiring over the proceeds from the sales, along with a significant portion of my savings. I was building my nest egg in a place my mother's financial advisors would never think to look. One of the hardest parts was navigating my relationships. I couldn't tell my friends the full story, not yet. I simply told them I was considering a long-term sabbatical to work abroad, framing it as a professional opportunity. They were excited for me, and their support, even for the partial truth I gave them, was a source of immense comfort. The only person who knew the entire plan was my Uncle Marcus. I showed him the part of David's report concerning the legacy trust and how my mother had co-opted his inheritance. He wasn't surprised, just deeply saddened. "She always saw money as a tool of control, not a means of support," he said, shaking his head. "I'm glad you're getting out, Becca. Don't look back." He became my silent co-conspirator. He offered to store the few boxes of sentimental items I couldn't bear to part with, no questions asked. His quiet solidarity was the moral compass I needed to stay the course. The final 2 weeks were a whirlwind of secret activity. The visa paperwork came through. I booked a one-way flight. I arranged for the shipment of my essential boxes to a storage unit in Lisbon. I gave notice to my landlord and my current job, timing it so my last day at work would be the Friday before my flight on Sunday. At work, I told them I was relocating for a new opportunity in Europe. To my family, I said nothing at all. The timing was perfect, almost poetic. My mother's 62nd birthday was on the Saturday of my departure weekend. She was, of course, throwing herself a lavish party at the mansion. It was billed as an intimate gathering for her closest friends and family, another opportunity for her to preside over her court. She had called me a week prior, her voice syrupy sweet, demanding my presence. "Don't you dare be late, Rebecca. It's important we all present a united front." A united front. The irony was so thick, I could barely breathe. I agreed to come, my voice perfectly level. This party, this final command performance would be my stage. It was the perfect venue for my closing statement. It wasn't going to be a screaming match or a dramatic scene. I wasn't going to wave David's report in her face or accuse her of her decades of emotional abuse. That would be playing her game, giving her the drama she craved. My revenge would be quiet, dignified, and absolute. It would be the simple, irreversible act of leaving. On the Friday before the party, I walked out of my office for the last time. My apartment was empty except for a suitcase, a carry-on bag, and the outfit I would wear to my mother's party. The echo of my footsteps in the vacant rooms was the sound of freedom. The gilded cage had been dismantled, piece by piece, by my own hands. All that was left was to walk out the door and lock it behind me. The night of my mother's birthday party was crisp and clear. I arrived at the mansion purposefully on time, but not early, merging with the flow of other guests. The house was ablaze with light, the sound of classical music and polite laughter spilling out onto the manicured lawns. As I walked through the grand foyer, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were a visitor in a foreign country, observing local customs I no longer had to abide by. I had spent my entire life feeling small and insignificant within these walls, but tonight I felt light. The weight of expectation, of constantly seeking an approval that would never come, was already gone. I found my mother holding court in the main drawing room, surrounded by her circle of wealthy friends. She was wearing a blood-red dress that shimmered under the chandeliers, a queen on her throw. She saw me and her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, a silent critique of my understated navy blue dress. But then her society smile snapped back into place. "Rebecca, darling, you made it," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Get yourself a drink. Try not to hide in a corner all night." It was a classic Aliner move, a public greeting that was also a subtle jab at my perceived introversion. The old me would have flushed with embarrassment. The new me simply smiled, a calm, genuine smile. "Of course, Mother, happy birthday." I got a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and positioned myself near the edge of the room, a perfect vantage point to observe the final act of this play. I saw my father, looking dapper but tired, making small talk with a group of his former colleagues. I saw Leo, preening and laughing, accepting compliments on a recent investment deal as if he were a conquering hero. I saw my Uncle Marcus leaning against a bookshelf, watching me with a knowing, supportive look in his eyes. He gave me a slight nod, and I nodded back. He was the only person in the room who knew this wasn't just another party for me. This was a farewell. An hour into the festivities, my mother gathered everyone for a toast. After my father gave a loving, if slightly generic, tribute, my mother decided to give her own speech, as she always did. She thanked everyone for coming and then, as if drawn by an inescapable gravitational pull, her attention turned to her legacy, her children. She lavished praise on Leo, recounting the same story of his latest financial triumph. Then, she turned her gaze to me. Perhaps it was the champagne, or perhaps she just couldn't resist the opportunity, but her expression turned condescending. "And I want to thank Rebecca for being here," she said, a smirk playing on her lips. A few of her friends chuckled, sensing the tone. "She's been so quiet lately, probably busy with her little computer games." I held my breath, waiting. This was it, the moment I'd replayed in my mind. One of her friends, emboldened by the atmosphere, called out, "Don't worry, Aliner. When you and Robert are gone, Leah will have plenty to take care of her." My mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh. It was the same sound I'd heard at the retirement party, but this time it held no power over me. She looked directly at me, her eyes glinting with malice. "Oh, darling, you're not getting a cent," she declared, for all to hear. "You've always been a disappointment. You get nothing." The room went quiet. It was a shockingly blunt statement, even for her. All eyes swiveled to me, expecting tears, a protest, a scene. They were hungry for the drama. I didn't give it to them. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat longer. I met my mother's triumphant gaze with a calm, unwavering look of my own. "That's okay," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying easily through the silent room. "I'm not here for your money. I'm here to celebrate with you one last time." I paused, letting the words sink in. "And to let you all know that I'm moving abroad. My flight is tomorrow." I added the final word with surgical precision. Permanently. Suddenly, she wasn't smiling. The triumphant smirk on her face dissolved, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then disbelief, then pure, unadulterated shock. Her jaw went slack. The color drained from her face. My words had completely derailed her script. She had expected me to beg, to cry, to fight for the scraps she was withholding. She had built her entire sense of power on the belief that I wanted something from her approval, love, money. The realization that I wanted none of it, that I had a life she knew nothing about, that I was leaving her control forever, hit her like a physical blow. "What?" she stammered, the single word a pathetic crack in her polished facade. "What are you talking about?" Leo looked just as stunned, his smug expression wiped clean. My father looked up, his eyes wide with alarm. "That's right," I continued, addressing the room but looking only at her. "I've accepted a wonderful position in Lisbon. I leave tomorrow morning. I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday before I go." I raised my glass. "To you, Mom." I turned, placed my empty champagne flute on a nearby table, and walked towards the door. The spell was broken. A murmur went through the crowd. I didn't look back. As I reached the foyer, my Uncle Marcus was there. He put a hand on my shoulder, and his eyes were shining with pride. "Go write your own history, Becca," he whispered. I smiled, gave his hand a squeeze, and walked out of that house for the last time, the sound of my mother shouting my name behind me. But I didn't stop. I just kept walking into the cool, quiet night, towards my real life. The first few weeks in Lisbon were a beautiful, chaotic symphony of newness. The scent of salt water and roasting chestnuts in tea. The air, the melodic cadence of the Portuguese language, the steep, cobbled streets that offered breathtaking views of the Tagus River at every turn. It was an assault on the senses in the best possible way. My new apartment, a bright, airy flat in the Graça neighborhood with a small balcony overlooking the city's terracotta rooftops, felt more like home in 3 days than my childhood house had in 32 years. It was mine. The furniture was simple, the walls were bare, but every corner was filled with the quiet, profound hum of freedom. My new job was both challenging and exhilarating. I was leading a talented team of designers, and my ideas were not just heard but valued and implemented. The professional respect I had craved for so long was given freely and without condition. In meetings, my voice was one of authority, not one to be dismissed as a little hobby. I was thriving, and the Rebecca who had felt small and silenced in her mother's drawing room seemed like a person from another lifetime. Of course, the fallout from my departure had been immediate and volcanic. My phone had exploded with messages and missed calls before I even boarded my flight. The first wave came from my mother. Her texts were a frantic, escalating mix of commands, threats, and accusations. "You can't be serious. You are embarrassing this family. Get back here right now, Rebecca. This is not a joke. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me." There was no apology, no introspection, just pure narcissistic rage that her subject had dared to walk off stage in the middle of her performance. The second wave came from my father. His messages were weaker, laced with confusion and a pathetic plea for reconciliation. "Becca, please call me. Your mother is distraught. Can't we talk about this? This is rash. You're breaking your mother's heart." He was still her enabler, her protector, viewing her manufactured distress as more important than the decades of my actual pain. Leo's messages were the most telling. They were dripping with scorn and disbelief. "Running away because you couldn't handle the pressure? Pathetic. You really think you can make it on your own without the family safety net? Good luck." He simply could not comprehend a world where someone would voluntarily walk away from the money and status he worshipped. My existence outside of that system was an insult to his entire worldview. I read them all once, on the plane, as we taxied down the runway. Then, I blocked all 3 of their numbers. I created a new email address for my personal life and a new phone number with a Portuguese SIM card. The only person from my old life who had my new contact information was my Uncle Marcus. We scheduled a video call once a week. He told me that my departure had sent shockwaves through the family. My mother, for the first time in her life, had lost control of the narrative. Her friends were gossiping. She had tried to spin the story, telling people I'd had a breakdown or that I'd run off with some man. But the quiet, dignified nature of my exit made her version sound hysterical and false. I hadn't made a scene, I had simply left. "She's lost her favorite punching bag," Marcus said during one of our calls, a sad smile on his face. "And she doesn't know what to do with herself. She keeps trying to find out where you are, but I've told her nothing. This is your life now." He also told me that my father had visited him, looking lost and old. He had admitted, in a moment of rare honesty, that he might have let things with Alina go too far. It was the closest he would ever get to an apology, and it was far too little, far too late. Months turned into a year. I built a life in Lisbon. I made friends, explored the coastline, learned to surf, and even started dating a kind, intelligent architect who loved my ambition and laughed at my jokes. My life wasn't a gilded cage. It was a vibrant, sprawling canvas, and I was the one holding the brush. I rarely thought about my family, and when I did, it was with a sense of distant pity rather than anger or pain. They were trapped in a world of their own making, a beautiful, empty museum where they could polish their trophies and count their money, forever prisoners of the values they held so dear. One evening, I was sitting on my balcony, a glass of vinho verd in my hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. My phone buzzed. It was an email from a US number I didn't recognize, forwarded through a professional networking site. It was from Leo. The tone was completely different from his last message. It was strained, almost desperate. The family's investments had taken a huge, unexpected hit. He had made a series of bad calls, and my mother's fortune was significantly diminished. He was asking, in a roundabout way, for financial help, for a loan. He even used the word "we," as if we were still a team. I read the email, and I felt no satisfaction, no desire for revenge, no schadenfreude, just nothing. His problems, his world, his mother's money, it was all completely irrelevant to me. It was a story about strangers. I deleted the email without a reply. I took another sip of my wine and looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle across the 7 hills of Lisbon. I had walked away from millions of dollars, from a legacy, from everything my family deemed important. And in exchange, I had gained everything that truly mattered: respect, peace, and a life that was authentically my own. They thought they had left me with nothing, but in reality, they had given me the greatest gift of all, the reason to find everything. And I had.